Good morning. We're talking about the presidential race, and as I said, we can't seem to get through a quarter hour without talking about politics. Good morning.
Morning.
So, what are your thoughts here as we get closer? Less than 2 weeks away now, and all we hear about is polls. Where are you?
Well, I wish there was more of a kind of exciting horse race forming at the top of the ticket here, but I think my read is not much different from others in terms of this is pulling away from Donald Trump. I think there's no recorded election in recent political history in which someone could come back from a polling deficit that he's at within the last 2 weeks. It's not completely out of the realm of possibility, but certainly in terms of the polling averages, he's between 6 and 8 points behind Clinton in most polls. And, the only kind of saving grace for him is that there's a still larger percentage of poll respondents are either undecided or interested in one of the third parties this election season than before. So possibly, if all of those undecideds pulled in the direction of Trump, he might be able to eke it out, but it's hard to see how he does it.
Professor, it's interesting. Over the weekend, the latest WikiLeaks involved some email discussions between Clinton's campaign and her campaign, the foundation, and an appearance in Morocco with the president of, or the king of Morocco. I don't know if it's a president or a king. But, over the weekend, Bob Woodward was saying this is clearly corruption, but then he went on to make the point it doesn't matter. Can you ever think of a time where a candidate for office was caught up in what many are saying is clear corruption? I know WikiLeaks is a sticky situation because it's something we normally would not be have the access to, have the ability to see those emails. Your thoughts on this quote unquote clear corruption and why it doesn't impact the polls at all?
Well, I bet it. I should say I would. If I were to guess, it will impact the polls in the next 2 weeks. You'll see a tightening. Sort of October surprises, as they're called. They happen in elections sometimes. You get sort of late-breaking stories. I wouldn't count out the possibility that there's going to be more late-breaking stories regarding Trump in the last 2 weeks as well that the campaign's been holding on to. But I do definitely think. In some ways, Trump's biggest asset for these last 2 weeks is the fact that there isn't any more debates, because it turned out that wasn't helping him in terms of giving him to gain ground. And instead, you have a few weeks in which there is the time for reporters to pore over this, huge dump of stolen emails through WikiLeaks, and a little bit of time to actually go through and digest what they say and pick out and find the things that are most kind of eye-opening. Currently, the Morocco story is definitely one of them. At the same time, you have you have news about Obamacare and premium hikes going up on exchanges that are also sort of bad news cycles for Democrats at this moment. So, the reason why a scandal, to the extent that this is a scandal relating to Morocco, might not end up affecting the race is simply because there's only so much time left. Voting has already been going on now for several weeks.
Right.
And
there's so
Clinton
much
has a commanding lead.
There's so much out there. I want to say on the WikiLeaks stuff, I'm so against Marco Rubio refuses to talk about WikiLeaks because he says, I'm not getting into it. They are illegal. They are stolen. It's an influence from a foreign government. And we're going to be next, talking about Republicans. Don't think we're not going to be next. I'm not getting into the weeds here. And to me, I respect that. If something comes out, like in this case, shows scandal, I get it. All right, you got to run with that. And, it was revealed. Donald Trump's taxes, whether, I'm still not sold that he didn't send them himself. But anyway, but beyond all of that, I mean, it gets it out there, right? And gets the conversation going. But beyond all of that, what I have a problem with is the reporters that are taking the political strategy and the behind-the-scenes, closed-door political back and forth between members of a campaign, and they're turning that into a news story. That's just terrible because that doesn't belong out in public. I don't think that's fair, to be honest.
I used to be a journalist, and I think it raises very tough sort of ethical questions for journalists. I don't begrudge the dilemma. If you have this information
right.
out there, regardless of its provenance, it's hard to know how to stop from seeing what's newsworthy, et cetera. But I think you're right. It's a surreal moment. We have emails now that are sort of cataloged and documented on websites that have, that is John Podesta, the chairman of the Clinton campaign, emailing his wife about buying basil at the grocery store that night, or incredibly personal, totally banal, completely unnewsworthy personal correspondence that is just there for the taking now. At the same time, you get tons of intra-campaign correspondence that I think if any campaign ever was, all of the emails of internal staffers were exposed. I mean, just the language, the tone, all of it is unavoidably going to be not what you would put forth in sort of a public guise, but what it actually tells you that's unique about this campaign versus campaigns in general, I think, is a real open question. Yeah. It's a real uncharted territory we're in right now.
And I just think that the reporters should be responsible. And, okay, the Moroccan story, all right, there's real relevance there. That could be showing a great deal of corruption. That's different than Podesta calling somebody a name or saying we need to get out the black vote. And I mean, that's just stuff that reporters should look the other way. I don't think they should go after that stuff.
And there really is. You can frame any of those emails in a maximally sinister or newsworthy way, in a way that I think ends up misleading people about what is or isn't unusual or worth reporting about in a campaign.
Talking to Assistant Professor of Government at Hamilton College, Dr. Sam Rosenfeld. Okay, a little history here, and this is going to be tough to do off the cuff, but maybe you can help. So I'm trying to think back of the things that people have said or done. Now, this is both sides, Hillary and Trump. The things that candidates have said and done that have either destroyed their campaign and blew it up to the point where they had to drop out of the race, or they were beaten badly because of it. Gary Hart, right? Remember that Gary Hart story?
Sure. In the nominating race in '88, he sort of knocked himself out of contention. Another area where kind of journalistic ethics clashed with an important story, because he essentially invited the reporters to follow him around to show how he hasn't been cheating on his wife.
Right.
And lo and behold, he had.
He had been. George H.W. Bush being completely intrigued by the grocery store scanner. That's
right.
I mean, it was that little moment that was like, boy, I got to tell you, that just killed him.
And that was, again, it takes, and this is where Trump, I think, is different, because he's such an incredibly loud and central presence in his own campaign. Yep. Usually it takes a reporter or the press to frame these things. So I believe that was an early scalp of Maureen Dowd. She was the one, as a New York Times reporter, who first wrote a whole article about the checkout scanner issue for Bush. I'm thinking now back to not at the presidential ticket, although he ended up losing terribly, but George McGovern in '72 scrambling to get a vice presidential running mate at the convention in '72, and I'm blanking on who he was. He announced vice presidential running mate. Then it was disclosed that they didn't have any time to vet him. It was disclosed he had shock therapy. And
right. I can't think of the name, but I just saw something on this.
And he had to be dumped from the ticket. And then subsequently, historians found out that the famous quote from an anonymous Democrat about how George McGovern stands for acid, amnesty, and abortion, which was a tagline that really hurt his campaign and his brand. That was from that very running mate.
And then you fast forward to today, and pretty much you can say anything, and nothing will change the vote. It's crazy.
It's true. All I will say is it seems like nothing changes anything. The accumulation of those three debates had an effect on the polling that is unusual. And if you sort of look at the trajectory of the polling immediately prior to the first debate, and then look at it after the third debate, what you see is a really sustained opening up of the gap between Clinton and Trump from what had been narrowing to almost a neck-and-neck race. And that, I will say, is the effect of campaign events and what the candidates said on these very high salient, highly watched debates.
Yeah.
And that is an unusual outcome. Usually the debates don't seem to have that much of an effect, even if they push the polling a little bit.
It's crazy. Andrew.
Talking a little bit more about history and presidential elections. Historically, you have a lot of key battleground states like Ohio and Florida. How will they, what role will they play in this election? And do you find that some other states may come out and play a more important role than they have in the past?
Oh, absolutely. The map is changing in interesting ways. On the one hand, Ohio, which had been just the key bellwether battleground pivotal state for the last several election cycles, is not that this year, and is certainly within the winnable column for Clinton, but is much more favorable to Trump than many of the other sort of
big ag states there.
States.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Ohio and Iowa are Trump's strongest states among states that Obama has won in the past, and to a really striking degree. And you can break it down by demographics. That those are states that have a higher overall percentage of non-college educated white voters. That's the kind of key demographic for Trump. And so Ohio is becoming, in some ways, more red. It's breaking away from Pennsylvania, which it always had shared a lot of characteristics with, but Pennsylvania is, again, kind of solidly blue. On the flip side, Virginia has, over the course of just the last 12 years, become a almost solidly blue state in presidential elections. It's really striking. Yeah. Clinton has a double-digit lead there. It's not even contested at this point. What has happened in the last few weeks as Clinton's lead has solidified and the campaign's been feeling its oats, they are, part of this is always kind of psychological. It's like when Karl Rove took the Bush campaign to California in 2000 in the last few weeks of the 2000 race, just to kind of psych out the opposition. But, you're seeing her campaign in Arizona, in Texas, and in Utah, of all places. These are not states you usually see up for grabs, it's happening this year.
All right, I want to throw some numbers at you, and we'll let you go. These are interesting numbers, and I'd like you to comment. 3.3 million Muslim Americans in the United States, representing about 1% of the population. 55 million Hispanics in the U.S., 17% of the population. 159 million women in the United States, 52% of the population. Okay, and, oh, by the way, African Americans, 38 million, 12%. A lot of percentages there. And Trump, in some way, has, dramatically has struggled in these key demographics. How do you win without those numbers, those percentages?
Well, you end up doing as well as Donald Trump's doing in the polls. This is a long-term issue. This had already been a long-term issue for Republicans going into this election. That those numbers you're just reading, particularly when it comes to ethnic and racial minorities and their proportion of the overall electorate, the trajectory year by year is that those numbers grow, and so Republicans for a while have known they're doing great down ballot. They are a strong political party in terms of controlling state, local, and congressional seats in the United States, but they have a national presidential electoral problem related to the changing demographics of the electorate that for a long time they've tried to think about how to adjust to face. And Donald Trump, as a candidate, kind of represents the antithesis of all the ways in which they thought they would go about trying to win those demographics over. So that's something they got to face for elections to come.
Crazy times, and just less than 2 weeks away. It's going to be interesting. But do they hold on to the House, by the way, Republicans?
Yeah, I mean, it will take another. It's not within the realm of impossibility for Democrats to take it, but it would take, I think, another serious Trump meltdown of some unimagined variety to have it happen.
On the other side, the Senate seems to be in play. It looks like a toss-up right now. Do you agree?
Absolutely. I would say I would give a slight edge to the Democrats just because you have these razor-thin margins in battleground state after battleground state in the Senate, but the Republicans are predominantly Republican seats, so they would have to run the table and defend all of those seats to hold on to their majority. So if I were to guess, Democrats have a strong chance in the Senate.
Dr. Sam Rosenfeld, it'll be over soon.
Let's hope.
All right, thanks so much.